Okay, welcome everyone to part 2 of our series on Decoding Daniel the Prophet. A lot to tell you this evening. First of all, I need to recap last class because I see a number of you are new faces over here, which is all well and good. But I want to recap because this is a continuation of last class. Let's just do a quick 60-second summary, which may take me 3 minutes. Okay, and it goes like this. We know that there was a dictator who was the ruler of Babylonia, and his name was Nebuchadnezzar. And he came and destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, the temple that had stood for hundreds of years, built by King Solomon. While he was doing this, he had an idea, and this idea was really going to change, thank you so much, the course of Jewish and world history. He kidnaps many young Jewish boys. And they are the first exiles out of Judah, out of Israel. And he brings them to Babel. And he treats them really, really well. He gives them the best food. He gives them the best accommodation. And he gives them the best teachers. And the idea was to create a brain drain. He doesn't want to just kill Jews. He wants to break their spirit. But he may be crazy, but he wasn't stupid. He still wants Jews to be his advisors. And so he felt if he could take these young Jewish boys out of Israel into Babylonia, he would have continual advisors for many years to come. And the plan did actually work. We don't know who most of these boys were. We know who 4 of them were. And they were Daniel and his 3 best friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And these boys came in, they were young, and they had to study under the top teachers in Babylonia in the day for 3 years. A 3-year study, and he let them alone. Daniel said to himself, I don't want to eat non-kosher food. He was allowed to, la halacha, because he had to survive. He felt it was wrong, and the rabbis say because of this decision, he was able to reach the highest level of knowledge, and according to most people, including the Barbanel, the Abarbanel is the commentator we're going to follow and have been following up to now into the future, who says that he was a great prophet of God. As we're going to see, what he ends up revealing to Nebuchadnezzar and other great people after him must be prophetic in terms of its power and its brilliance. And so he says, only give me kosher food. And his 3 friends say, you know what? If Daniel's doing it, I'm doing it too. By the way, the rabbis learned from this, be very careful who your friends are, because they can impact you greatly. Because of that decision of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they survived an episode that we're going to describe today. And so, after 3 years, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And we mentioned the dream last week. I'll just sum it up for you one more time. In the dream, he sees a statue. And the statue is made up of 4 metals. It's made up of gold. The head's made of gold. The arms and the chest is made of silver, kesef, and the stomach is made of copper, and the legs are made of iron, and the feet and the toes are made up of iron and earthenware, clay. Now Nebuchadnezzar had forgotten what this dream even was, let alone the interpretation. Daniel did something unbelievable, which no one else could do. He told Nebuchadnezzar, number 1, what the dream was, because Nebuchadnezzar has forgotten the dream. And number 2, he told him the interpretation, that there were going to be 4 great kingdoms that were going to come after him. And his was the golden one. Put that in your cerebellums. We're going to revisit that in a moment. And the next was going to be the Persian Median one. That's the silver and the arms. And the stomach were the Greeks who came in the Second Temple period, Yavan. And the legs of iron were the Romans, the Edomites, Edom, as we know them as well. And that was last a long time. And at the end of days, we said, there's going to be a final war between the earthenware, which is the Bnei Ishmael, the Arabs, and the Edomites, which turned into the Christian world. The Notzrim is how the Abarbanel describes them. And he saw a stone, a rock, out of nowhere appear in his dream that smashed the feet of the statue, and it disintegrated. And then the stone got bigger and bigger and bigger in his dream, and it turned into a mountain. The stone represents the stone that Jacob rested his head on when he had that prophetic dream on Temple Mount. Remember that? Where he saw the ladder, he put his head on a stone, and this was a sign at the end of days the Jewish people would overcome all of these great kingdoms, and the Messiah, Mashiach, was going to come and to redeem the Jewish people like a great stone. So that stone in the dream was a vision of that stone that Jacob, many years before, had put and rested his head on. Okay, that is where we are up to. We're going to move to the next chapter, and this is all new information. One quick coincidence, which I don't believe in coincidence, but I must mention it. The two chapters we're going to discuss tonight both appear in today's Daf Yomi, which I try to study. I did not plan it that way, but the actual description is today's Daf Yomi about what's going to occur to Nebuchadnezzar, okay? Which is itself amazing. Another thing I want to mention is that this book of Daniel, if you ask anyone, even rabbis, and say, have you studied Daniel before? They're like, oh, I'd love to, but it's in Aramaic. And Aramaic is difficult to understand. Fortunately, we have many commentators, including the R Scroll, and including the Abarbanel, who is the one, my go-to when it comes to this particular book. Why is this book different from all other books? Man ishtana hasefer hazeh mikol ha-sefarim. Why is it different? So I read something amazing this week. And it's going to blow your mind. And it's going to be very important when we get to the latter chapters of this book. And it is, Daniel was one of two people who knew the exact time, date, and identity of Mashiach. He knew who Mashiach is going to be, he knew when he's going to come, and how he's going to come. Now that's unbelievable. No one else was privy to that information except Yaakov Avinu, Jacob. Isn't that incredible? So what? So it's written in Aramaic because had it been written in Hebrew, it would have been easier to decipher the code that's in this book, which describes the end of days. And the rabbis wanted it to be kept a secret. And that's why it's written in Aramaic, so it's more cryptic and difficult to decipher Mashiach's identity and arrival time. That's what the Gemara tells us. Next piece, which I mentioned last class, I didn't give an answer to it, but I'm going to now, is why is this book, Daniel, if he's a prophet, not mentioned in the book of prophets? You know, we have Tanakh, Torah, the 5 books of Moses, Nevi'im, the prophets, and Ketuvim, writings. And this book of Daniel is not included in the book of prophets, it's included in the book of writings. If he was a prophet, like the Abarbanel and many others do believe, then why isn't this book? It's actually connected to the first reason, which is, had it been put into the prophets, everyone would have studied it as a book of future prophecy about what's going to happen in the future. And that would have revealed, possibly, the identity and the arrival time and date of Mashiach. And therefore, it's like a double secret. There's a double lock on it. It's Aramaic, and it's not in the book of prophets, so you can't decipher prophecy to figure out the Mashiach's actual arrival. Having said that, many do attempt to do that by studying this particular book. And the Abarbanel, who does his commentary on the book of Daniel, goes out of his way to talk a lot about Mashiach's arrival, because Daniel has already revealed things about the end of days, and he's going to do a whole lot more. Are we good? Okay, the next chapter begins with Nebuchadnezzar doing something really unusual, or then again, maybe not so unusual. He builds a statue. And the statue is made of gold. And it's really tall. It's actually 60 amot, which is anywhere from, 100 to 120 feet or so. Right? That's a vast, vast statue. And it's 6 amot wide, which is what? Anywhere from 8 to 12 feet wide. Which, by the way, shouldn't be able to keep a statue of gold erect. So they actually had to import gold out of Jerusalem, because gold was very abundant during the First Temple period because of Shlomo HaMelech, who was very famous and very rich, and they imported, and he was given many gifts of gold from the other parts of the world, and they brought this gold that belonged to Shlomo HaMelech to Babylon in order to support this. And this is also to help realize a prophecy that Jerusalem would be punished because of the destruction, and gold would come out of it. So they supported it via gold. Why did he build this statue? What's he doing? And I'll tell you what he did with the statue. He summoned from all over the areas that he was in charge of, which is a very large area, many thousands and thousands of great leaders to come and bow down to this statue. That's what he did. Okay? Now there's two opinions. Opinion number one was that he made an idol of himself. He made himself into a god, small g, and had people come and bow down to it. Now this shouldn't seem too weird to you, because even today you see many dictators who start to take power, just like in North Korea. And did you know there's a law in North Korea, you can watch videos about this, where every time you pass a statue of Kim Jong-un and Il, you actually have to stop and bow down to it. Now, I don't know if they actually say this is Avodah Zarah, actual idol worship. If it was, as Jews, we probably couldn't do it. And as humans, I would not suggest visiting North Korea. The last time an American did that, he got into a little bit of trouble and ended up being killed by the North Korean authorities. Having said that, it's common that great people, Pharaoh included, you remember the story with Moshe Rabbeinu and Paro? He made himself into, he got so much power and so much money, the power goes to the head and they make themselves into gods. Which is why, if you remember, Moshe Rabbeinu went to visit Paro when? Early in the morning. Where? In the Nile. Why? Because Paro said, I'm a god, and gods don't need to go to the bathroom. So he would go to the Nile early in the morning in order to make, which is why specifically that's when Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, would go to the Nile to speak to him, like, I know what you're doing. So many conversations between Moses and Pharaoh, Moshe Rabbeinu and Paro, were actually at the morning in the Nile while he was making. That was Moshe Rabbeinu's like, shtuch, I know who you really are. Don't make yourself into a god. So that's one opinion. Now, if that is the case, that he did actually make the statue, that he's a god, then it makes sense that when he calls three people, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who were important advisors to him as well, not as great as Daniel, but were very important advisors to him, it makes sense that they didn't bow down for that reason. Okay, that would make sense. Having said that, the Abarbanel, who we're going with, and others say, no, that wasn't the case. He didn't build a statue to make himself into a god. He built it to show that he's a powerful person, just like we build statues around town, right? You see in every city, right? There's a Christopher Columbus over there. They don't build a statue as a way of saying you should worship this person. You build a statue as a, commemorative, respectful thing. Now, these three Jews, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, don't bow down to the statue. They refuse. The rest of the Jewish people do bow down. Okay? If it was Avodah Zarah, they wouldn't have done it. So it most likely was not Avodah Zarah, it was a statue. So why didn't Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah bow down to the statue? By the way, the fact that they didn't means that they will eventually, we're going to describe in a minute, be thrown into a fiery furnace. A big, hot, fiery furnace. That was the law. You don't bow down, you're dead. If it wasn't Avodah Zarah, just bow down and that's the end of it. So why didn't they bow down? That's the famous question. And why did all the other Jews agree to bow down? Well, the question is not on them because it's not a god. So it goes like this. Why do you think, from what we said so far, did Nebuchadnezzar build a golden statue of himself? Why gold? Sound familiar? I mentioned it earlier on. Because of the dream. And what part of the dream statue was gold? The head. And who's the head? Him. By building this statue of entirely of gold, he was saying, forget the other parts. My kingdom is always going to be there. Forget the Persians. Forget the Medians. forget the Greeks, forget the Romans, they're nothing. All these other nations that Daniel spoke about, they mean nothing, and forget the Jewish people's ultimate takeover via Mashiach at the end of days. It's all done. You Jews are finished. All the other nations are nothing. It's all me. It's all gold. She turns around to these three great Jewish people, leaders, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and says, bow down. And they're like, no, because we're leaders. And if we do bow down, everyone's going to think that we agree, says Abarbanel, to this theory that there's never going to be a redemption for the Jewish people. Others can bow down, but we cannot. And they didn't. Now, what happened to them is extraordinary. I'm going to tell you in just a moment. But I want to sidetrack and jump forward a little bit. After this story, not too long after, there's going to be another famous story called Megillat Esther. That follows this story chronologically. Now, do you remember what happened? The Jewish people were invited to a feast, and they didn't eat the feast. Then Haman comes along, and Mordechai won't bow down for similar reasons to these. Actually, where Haman decided to make himself into a god, and Mordechai deciding not to bow down, it's probably very much based upon this story that happened previously. Are you with me? Mordechai's like, they didn't bow down, I ain't bowing down either, because Mordechai was the chief rabbi of his day. But the rest of the Jewish people did. So there's a big discussion why the Jewish people, in the Gemara, in Megillah actually, why the Jewish people were threatened with annihilation at the hands of Haman. One of the answers given was because they bowed down to this idol of Nebuchadnezzar. Those three guys didn't, but the rest of the Jewish people did. So the Gemara asked, well, if they did bow down and they were deserving of annihilation, then why didn't God annihilate them? And the amazing answer is, get ready for this, Hashem did midah keneged midah, measure for measure. Oh, they bowed down, but they didn't really mean it. So God's like, no problem. I'll pretend to kill you, but I don't really mean it either. It's the exact balance of this story. A lot of stuff happens to us based upon what it could have happened a year, 5 or 10 years before, or maybe more, and it's all measure for measure. Oh, we're bowing down, we don't really mean it. Hashem's like, I'm going to kill you. Oh, I don't mean it either. And it was eventually came to mechaper, atone for this bowing down. Had it been a real bowing down and a real idol, that would have been it for the Jewish people. But that's not what happened. Okay. So now we have our three people. And he says, bow down. And they're like, ain't happening. By the way, where do they learn it from? Where did they learn it from? Where did they get this idea that we shouldn't bow down and I'm willing to be cast into a fiery furnace? Sound familiar? Very good. Avram Avinu and Nimrod. Eerily similar. Eerily similar. What's this thing with fiery furnaces? Why don't you just like stab them or throw them off a cliff or something? Because when you burn something, you're removing all trace of its existence. This has been a tried and true method of anti-Semites, of Jew haters for thousands of years, up to Yamach Shema, the Nazis. Why do they burn us? So there's no evidence and no trace of the Jewish people ever again. That's part of why they did it, right? They're removing their own guilt, but also too as if these Jewish people are gone forever. That's what went to the whole effort and trouble of burning the corpses. Okay, fine. So now these three are like, fine, we're not bowing down. He's like, if you don't bow down, you're going in. Like, we don't care. Nebuchadnezzar freaks out. Oh, by the way, it was a bunch of other people, non-Jewish people at the time, who didn't like the Jews. They were called the Kasdim. And they're like, oh, just so you know, those three aren't bowing down. They're reported against. This, they learn out, is pure classic Lashon Hara, and teaches how Lashon Hara can actually kill people, right? Even by these people, okay? So they bind them up and they tie them. And Nebuchadnezzar is furious. By the way, where's Daniel during this entire episode? Where did he go to? He's not mentioned in this episode at all. So some actually say that Daniel wasn't in Babylon at the time. he'd gone somewhere on business, and Nebuchadnezzar chose this time specifically because he knew that had Daniel been there, and he loved Daniel, he actually deified him, made him into a god, which Daniel refused. He would have actually succumbed and said, oh fine, I won't kill them. I won't make anyone do this. So he waited, Nebuchadnezzar, when Daniel was out of town, which is why he's not mentioned the story, because he knows that had he turned around and be like, oh, please don't do it, Nebuchadnezzar probably would listen to him because he saved his life. You with me so far? Okay. He takes the fire. And the book of Daniel tells us that he makes it 7 times hotter than usual. So it used to be hot. Now this big, massive pit was 7 times hotter. Some say it was so hot that anyone who got near it was burned to death immediately. By the way, why do you have to do that? Why not just keep on a regular temperature? That was hot enough to kill people, we know that. Listen to this crazy calculation Nebuchadnezzar made. He said, you know what? You got a good God, you Jews. It could be that he could save you from this fire. It could be. However, I don't want to risk it. Maybe he's great, but maybe he's not that great. So I'm going to make it 7 times hotter so that even your God can't save you. He was basically trying to beat God at his own game. You should know by now, you don't try to cheat God at his own name and his own game. That's just not the way it works. And Hannah, Mishael, and Azariah, they knew that Avram Avinu had been saved, and they felt confident that they would be saved as well. They didn't rely, but they expected to die. Al tismoch ala nes, but they had great faith. And Nebuchadnezzar said, if your God is so great, let him save it. By this was done publicly. This wasn't like in a basement somewhere. It's probably one of the reasons they didn't bow down, because everyone knew about it, and it would have disheartened the entire Jewish people. Just so you know, the book tells us, the book of Daniel, that they turned up in their finest governor outfits, their uniforms. And they learned from this that even at the worst times, when the worst thing is going to happen, Rashi mentions this, you should still feel proud of yourself and dress up in your finest gear. If you're going to go down with your head up. Incredible lesson just there and then. They came in full special cloaks and official garments, not to appear shamed and confused, to show everyone they knew exactly what they were doing. They're very important people. Okay, so now he brings them close. And they bring them close enough, and it says they fell in. They fell into this furnace. Really? Why doesn't it say they were pushed? So they say it was so hot, this furnace, and it was so massive, it created fires throughout Babylon. It just literally spread, as you can imagine, wildfire in that hot environment. And the people who were carrying them close died instantly. They caught fire and died instantly. And they were being carried. So they fell into the fire. And as far as everyone's concerned, they're dead. Nebuchadnezzar and everyone then sees 4 figures walking through the fire. 4 figures. Now, I'm going to say something very strange right now, and I know that none of you are aware of this, but I must tell you something which a number of the viewers, because most of my viewers, sadly, are not Jewish people, they're non-Jewish people, though it's good they are too, believe the following. And I'm only mentioning it because the Abarbanel mentions it as well. Okay? And we're following the Abarbanel, as I told you a number of times. Who is this 4th person? Who is this 4th person? So Nebuchadnezzar says, this is Bar Elokin. This is the son of a god. That's how he sees him. Now, the Christians get very excited by this. And they say, oh, it must be that Yeshu, Jesus, is in the fire with them. Now, obviously, that's complete enough for nonsense and drivel. Firstly, because he wasn't born yet, the Abarbanel says. So even he brings down this ridiculous claim that that's who the 4th person was. If you look it up online, don't even look it up, take my word for it. Who is the 4th person in the fiery furnace? Oh, that's who it is. He wasn't born yet. It wasn't him. It's absolutely ridiculous. What do they say? Now, this, because the expression, son of Elokin, that expression, if you knew your Tanakh, even as a young child, would know that expression is an expression that comes a number of times to describe angels. There are a number of ways that angels are described, and this is one of them. And actually the proof is that later on, at a later stage, we're going to tell you in a minute, even Nebuchadnezzar, who describes them that way, even he later on says, I saw a malach inside the fire. Okay, so I just want to dispel that insanity, okay, that's who this fourth person was. So who was the fourth person? Who was it? Listen to this crazy piece of Torah. There was, and I don't know what this means, an argument in Shemayim, who's going to go down and save these three great people from the fire. So there was an angel called Yorkami. That's what he's called. Who is Yorkami? I know it sounds like Japanese. Maybe he was. Who is Yorkami? He is the angel who's in charge of, anyone know? I didn't. No, of hail. Hail. He says, I'll go and I will extinguish the fire at just the right moment and they'll survive. Would that have been a miracle? Would that have been a miracle? They're about to be thrown in suddenly, or they get thrown in and rains open and extinguish the fire, they survive. Pretty impressive, but not impressive enough. Because people would say, it rained at just the right time. Just like they say when the Jewish people went through the Yam Suf, the Egyptians, it split at just the right time. They knew the tides, they knew the moon, how it works, and that's how they went through. So the miracle would have been good, but not great. That would have been a nes b'toch teva, a miracle within nature. So Gabriel, who is the angel of fire, says, I'm going in to rescue them. Wow, you're adding fire to fire. And he's like, that's my point. See, if I go in and I walk through this fire and save them, and everyone knows that I'm the angel of fire, they're going to be like, nah, that's impressive. So that's exactly what he does. He goes in, and whatever this means, the fire on the outside is extremely hot, but there's no heat inside. And they survive totally. And the book tells us that not even the ropes and not even the clothing they were wearing was singed, and they came out not even smelling of fire. They smelled exactly as they did before they went in. This is called a nes b'toch nes, a miracle within a miracle. The fire wasn't extinguished, they survived it, which is, as you can imagine, a higher level of miracle. Nebuchadnezzar sees this, and he's like, oh my goodness, that is unbelievable. And they come out, and he greets them publicly, and says, wow, your God is the great God, massive Kiddush Hashem, and that's the end of that story. Interestingly, from this point on, we never hear about these three people ever again. And there's a big discussion, why not? Where are they? Different opinions. One opinion was, it's going to sound strange, they died not soon after, not too soon, not too late after this whole story. They died because of Ayin Hara. I know. People heard about what happened to them. They got jealous, a great miracle, and they died because of it. Okay, that's one opinion, but that's probably not what happened. The Abarbanel and others say that what they did was they realized this guy is a complete and utter divoneh, majnun, crazy person, right? And one minute is like this, you know these dictators, they're like narcissistic mishuganas. He's like, forget about it. So they were very famous now, and everyone knew what happened to them. So they took the opportunity and they got the heck out. And they went to Israel and spent the rest of their lives in Israel. And there's other references to people who are not identified as Anshe Mofet, people that great miracles happened to, in other books in Tanakh, and they say, it's actually referring to Hanan, Mishael, and Azariah, and they ended up moving to Israel, made Aliyah, and they were safe there because this great miracle happened to them. You don't mess with people that go through fire, you know what I'm saying? It ain't so good. Okay, that's what happened to them, and they were saved. I'm going to tell you what happened next in a few minutes, and then we're going to stop and we're going to discuss the continuation next class. Nebuchadnezzar has another dream. Here we go again. Like one dream is not enough. And in the dream, he sees a tree. This is dream number 2. And the tree is big. And it is mighty. And it goes from the earth to heaven. It's a dream. And there's branches. And the branches are beautiful. And there's fruit. And there's animals that are residing under the branches of this tree. And people are eating. And the animals are eating from this tree. Beautiful, amazing tree. Comes an angel, descends, and it destroys the tree. It chops it down. And all the animals scatter. And all the branches break. And all that's left is a stump. Hold on to that stump. We're going to revisit it later. That's an important feature of this particular story. It's all gone. And he wakes up and he's like, here we go again. Well, I better find someone to interpret it. So he does the same thing he did last time. And he collects all of his philosophers and astrologers and necromancers and his demon speakers. And he says, who knows what this dream means? Now, remember last time, a group popped up and they said, we'll tell you. And they didn't know, and they got cut to pieces. So here, everyone kept that. They tried their very, very best to interpret it. Nothing at all. What does he do? He's like, oh, I got this Jewish guy, Daniel, who saved me. Why didn't he go to him first? I don't know. Maybe he's out of town again. I got no idea. But he calls him in, and he says, Daniel, I need your help. And he tells him the dream. And he goes, please, and he actually tells him this stuff. Tell me what this dream means. And Daniel says, give me a minute. You don't rush into interpretations. Yeah? Give me a minute to think about it. And this is what it means. Anyone want to guess what the interpretation of this dream was? Yep, I don't know either. So it goes like this. Well, I would have thought it's a sign that his kingdom, for what he did to these 3 guys, was going to be cut off. But that's not what it was. That's not what it was. It was a personal dream about him. A personal dream about him. So Daniel told him this privately. He said that in a duration of 7, now we're not too sure how long the 7 was, 7 days, weeks, months, we're not too sure. Something is going to happen to you. You are going to become, now this is my word, but you can describe it any way you want, completely insane. You're going to become crazy because you became too arrogant by building this statue. You overreach your boundaries, and you're going to live like an animal, specifically like an ox. And your hair is going to grow, and your beard, and everyone's going to know that you are completely crazy, and you're going to eat grass out of the ground. This is the king he's talking to. And this is how you are going to live for a long period of time. After that, if you accept this punishment, you will go back, and it can't be your complete destruction because there's a stump. Still a stump left. And the dream and the interpretation did mention the stump. Had it been a complete death of his, there wouldn't have been any trace of him whatsoever. There's a stump. So you're going to come back and you're going to regrow. Okay? But it's going to be a terrible, terrible time for you. And all of this because you became too arrogant. And one thing the Torah does not like is great leaders who become too arrogant. And I'll give you one halakha which I read recently about this. Did you know that when we pray the Amidah, we bow down how many times? 4 times. When a king prays, he bows down once and he stays prostrated for the entire prayer. Imagine that. When a king prays, he goes down once and he stays low because he's so powerful and so incredible that it could well be that he becomes too arrogant. Therefore, the Torah goes out of its way to keep him level and low and humble. Then Daniel does something which the rabbis are not happy with. All the commentators and the rabbis in the Gemara and elsewhere criticize him for doing this. Because Nebuchadnezzar says to him, oh my God, that's terrible. I'm going to be living like an animal, eating the grass, going out of my mind. Right? The madness of King Nebuchadnezzar. This is really, really bad. What should I do? Now, what should Daniel said at this point? Don't know. Good luck with that. next time don't make statues and make everyone bow down to you. He doesn't. He says, we have a tradition that if, lo aleinu, there's a really bad decree that is put upon you, what you can do is to do chesed for poor people. If you give charity and you do chesed, acts of kindness, that's a sign of humility. Right? By giving money to the poor and by smiling towards being good, you're showing you're humble, you're not above them. That's what you should do. And that's exactly what he did. And it worked. And the rabbis are like, what do you do that for? You're like prolonging the life of this guy and you're helping him escape punishment. He killed thousands of Jewish people and other people. He's a really, really bad guy. They say because of this, Daniel was punished, which we'll look at next week, by being thrown into the lion's den. Okay, that episode is a teaser. That's coming. That's going to be an incredible, unbelievable story, which is going to follow this one, of him being thrown into the lion's den. And I'm talking about hungry lions. Okay, that's coming. So they say that's one of the reasons. Another opinion is that that's unconnected with that. That's disconnected to that. He was punished later on when he became an advisor to the Persians. He's called in Megillat Esther, there's an anonymous character called Hatach. Hatach. Hatach means halved. So at the end of his life, he didn't remain great to the end of his life. His power and his prestige was halved. So when you read Megillat Esther and you see this person called Hatach, it's actually referring to Daniel because his power and his prestige was halved by that point in his life. And that was punishment for doing this. So he says to Nebuchadnezzar, don't worry, do chesed. And he starts to do it. Day 1, day 2, nothing happens to him. He's still normal. Month 1, month 2, month 3. After 1 year, and we don't know why 1 year, it's kind of arbitrary. It was actually an amount of time picked up by Nebuchadnezzar. He stops. And he goes crazy. He stops. Why did he stop? We're not too sure. But he realized at that point maybe the decree after 1 year had gone away. Maybe he thought he'd done enough to shuvah by giving all this money and treating people. And it actually happened. He's walking on a building, and there's a poor person. And the poor person says, can I have some money? And up to that point, he'd given money and taken care of poor people. At this point, he's like, if I keep giving money away, how am I going to keep building all my amazing buildings over here? Boop, end of story. The chesed didn't work. Something that Daniel knew his chesed wasn't going to last. People like that, they give tzedakah once or twice and then it's all over. So he knew it was going to happen anyway. That's why he gave him the advice. It just prolonged what was eventually definitely going to happen anyway. At that point, he goes crazy. Now the description, and we'll finish with this, of what happened to Nebuchadnezzar is actually written in a letter. And we only know what happens to him because he wrote it himself, distributed it, and the people who wrote this book of Daniel, probably the Anshe Knesset Gadolah, which is pretty much the Sanhedrin, included his public letter in the book of Daniel. So it's actually written in the first person. Up to now, we're talking about him, I guess, in the third person. Now it's written in the first person. And he says, listen to what happened to me. And it's in the first person. And he tells this horrific story of how he lives like an animal. And he can't think straight. And he goes crazy. And he's with animals. And he's attacked by them. And he eats dirt. And he has to sleep outside. And he's rained on. And the heat. And it's terrible. And then he says, but eventually I came to my senses. I came to realize that this was a punishment for my absolute arrogance, and I went back to my previous position, and he actually became greater than he was after this punishment. And he finishes off this letter, which is how the chapter ends, and we're going to end tonight, describing himself the entire time as King Nebuchadnezzar, and at the end, he says, but in the end, Nebuchadnezzar survived. That means he learned his lesson, he was no longer arrogant, and he didn't refer to himself as Nebuchadnezzar Malka, Melech Nebuchadnezzar in Aramaic, but he is plain old Nebuchadnezzar. And that is how the chapter ends. Next class, we are going to meet Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, according to most opinions, whose name is Belshazzar, and he takes over the kingdom of his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar, and he's going to throw a crazy party, like crazy, and something unbelievable is going to happen to him at that party, and that, God willing, we're going to see next Monday night. We'll stop over there. Thank you very, very much. Questions, thoughts, comments on anything we discussed? Hi.
If we look in the book, if we open the Chumash, can we find the book of Daniel and read it, or because it's in Aramaic?
You can find it. It's there. Go open the book of writings, right? You have the 5 Megillot over there, Megillat Esther and Eicha, right? And you'll find the book of Daniel. And it starts in Hebrew, and then suddenly, at the beginning, because Daniel is too young, so the early part of his life is in Hebrew, and once he gets active, it becomes Aramaic. So you can read it. It's in Hebrew, as in Hebrew letters, so you can actually read the words. Aramaic is a mixture of Hebrew and probably a little bit of Persian, of its day, and some other languages mixed in. So you'll recognize some words, like Melech becomes Malka, things like that. But I recommend reading the translation with a commentary.
Okay, thank you.
You'll find it, yeah.
When does Aramaic become the common language of the land of Israel?
Right, very, very good. So it becomes more common at this point, at the dispersion. At the dispersion, after destruction, they go to Babylonia, and they start to find a language they could converse in that wasn't full Hebrew, you know what I'm saying? It's like a mix like Yiddish. A little bit of Hebrew, a little bit of Polish. It's like Ladino. It becomes a common parlance. Some say they did it specifically because they wanted to keep Hebrew only for very holy purposes like prayer and learning Torah. They didn't want to make regular conversations outside of Israel into that particular language. So that's probably when it's started to found. And we see a number of prayers in Aramaic because there is a tradition that angels do not understand any language besides Hebrew. So you see a number of prayers like Baruch Shema and Kaddish are written in a language that bypasses the Malachim, the angels, right, and goes directly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's another discussion, yeah. Are we good? Yeah.
What happens to, when he comes back, Daniel, and sees all his friends are gone, is there a reaction? Or?
We're not told. We don't know what his reaction was when he came back. He obviously heard, this was a massive event, right? And everyone heard about it. It was done deliberately, publicly, just like the days of Avram Avinu. Everyone knew be thrown into the furnace via Nimrod. So he found out about it, and he heard about the tremendous Kiddush Hashem, right? The tremendous sanctification of God's name that happened to his friends. But we're not told about the relationship. Remember, this is not a storybook. It's not a story of events. It's a story of people and relevant stories for the Jewish people for the rest of history. So not every episode is mentioned over here. Actually, we're going to jump and miss a leader. We're going to go from the grandfather Nebuchadnezzar to next week, next chapter, go straight to Belshazzar. We missed out 23 years of the son called Evil Merodach. He's not even mentioned. And they say because his life wasn't so, nothing really happened of great significance. So he's not even mentioned in the book. Weirdly enough. Okay, fabulous. Dinner is served. See you all next Monday night, Amiss Hashem. Thank you, guys.